Welcome, everyone. My name is Benjamin Durker with the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure. And we're just really excited to bring a panel discussion here with some great folks in the energy and climate and regulatory and utility space, kind of a good intersection here. And we're going to have a great moderation by Dr. Chris Hill. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you and really looking forward to seeing where this conversation goes.
Thanks, Ben, and hello and welcome. I'm Chris Hill, the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure, AII's Advisory Council Chair and CEO of Casey Hill Consulting. I'll be your moderator today on our discussion of matching technological breakthroughs with regulatory innovation. This panel is a production of the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure, a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank dedicated to identifying pragmatic solutions to infrastructure challenges. AII brings together leaders across sectors to foster data-driven policy, innovation, dialogue, to modernize and strengthen America's critical infrastructure systems. Today's conversation is inspired by AII's recent policy brief titled Achieving American Energy Infrastructure and Economic Wins Simultaneously. This brief outlines how policy innovation, particularly in the regulatory space, must keep pace with rapid advances in energy technology. It highlights opportunities to align economic growth with energy resilience, urging better collaboration between public and private sectors to scale breakthrough solutions faster, smarter, and more equitably. That's exactly why we're here today and what we're going to be exploring. I'm honored to be joined by four leaders at the intersection of innovation and regulations. First, Chris Croker, NW Natural's Director of Decarbonization, bringing deep insights into how local utilities are integrating emerging technologies while navigating regulatory frameworks. Kiera Zitelman, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners Technical Director, representing the voice of state-level regulators across the country. Michael Jung, Modern Hydrogen's Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy, a company pushing the envelope on clean hydrogen and decarbonization technology. And Stephen Scheineman, Puget Sound Energy's Hydrogen Development Manager, who brings both technical and strategic perspectives on how large-scale utilities can pilot, adapt, and deploy innovation. In this conversation, we'll hear how each of these experts is approaching the challenge of matching breakthrough ideas with enabling policy, and why doing so is not just possible, but urgent. I'll begin by giving each panelist a moment to introduce themselves, their organization, and share their perspective on why conversations like this and on this topic are so essential. So with that said, ladies first, Kiera, would you mind opening us up with some brief remarks about yourself, your organization, and your perspective on our topic at hand?
Of course. Thanks very much, Chris, and thank you to the Alliance for inviting me to speak on this webinar. My name is Kiera Zitelman. I'm a technical director at NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation. NARUC is the trade association for state-level public utility regulators. We represent state public service commissions, public utility commissions across all 50 states and U.S. territories and the District of Columbia. Public utility commissions are created through state constitutions or state statutes to provide or to oversee the provision of safe, reliable, affordable, and non-discriminatory service for regulated utilities. So on matching technological breakthroughs with regulatory innovation, I think we often hear about regulators being talked about as not matching the speed of technological innovation. And I think it is important to understand the role of state utility regulators and what motivates them, what their priorities are, and for technology developers or utilities or other stakeholders who are looking to bring these technologies to market, just understanding how to talk to the regulatory community and how to envision benefits for utility customers with the commercialization of some of these technologies, I think is very important. So hoping to expand on that during this webinar, and interested in hearing from the other panelists on their thoughts as well.
Thanks, Kiera. Michael?
Hi, Mike Jung with Modern Hydrogen. Based out in Portland, Oregon, and Modern Hydrogen is a technology startup based out of Seattle, Washington. Modern has figured out how to split methane into its constituent molecules, solid carbon, and clean hydrogen. This is a technology that we refer to as methane pyrolysis, or distributed natural gas pyrolysis, or maybe decarbonized natural gas pyrolysis. The technology is not fundamentally new in the sense that we've known for a long time that high heat eventually breaks almost anything down into its constituent parts. But the real innovation that Modern has brought to the table is figuring out how to do this at a small distributed scale that makes it possible to implement this at the edge of the existing infrastructure, which lets us use all of the assets that we've already got in the ground today and the workforce that knows how to operate it safely, reliably, and affordably, and do it in a way that's consistent with some of the environmental objectives that are emerging, and also putting us in a position to have new materials to build the infrastructure that is long overdue.
Chris?
Hey everyone, Chris Craker, Decarbonization Director at Northwest Natural. We're a small gas utility, relatively speaking, in the Pacific Northwest, headquartered in Portland, Oregon. We do serve a little bit of the Southwest Washington as well. We have about 800,000 meters and serve about 2.5 million customers, and we've been around since, well, before Oregon was a state, so over 166 years. We've been innovating all along the way, so moving from manufactured gas to moving to natural gas, and now innovating what's flowing through our pipes in the form of hydrogen and renewable natural gas and carbon capture. So we are highly motivated to decarbonize, and to that end, we have some really interesting regulations here in Oregon that require us to decarbonize at a very rapid pace. And it's kind of flipping the paradigm where utilities have been expected to be very slow and methodical and as risk-free as possible. With these very aggressive decarbonization targets, we need to be a little bit more of a mindset where we're taking on more risk to look at some new technologies that really could decrease costs for our customers sooner rather than later. And that's where the tension comes in with us and our regulatory environment. And that's what hopefully we dig into a little bit more today. So thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Stephen?
Yeah, hi, Steve Shinneman, Puget Sound Energy. I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about following Chris will probably echo what he says. As Washington's oldest and largest integrated utility, we're based just east of Seattle in Bellevue, Washington. We serve about 900,000 gas customers, about 1.2 million electric customers, and have a generation capacity of around 5,500 megawatts. What's driving our interest and really leaning into the emerging technology space is a rule that was passed by the Washington State Legislature in 2018, Energy Transformation Act. And that law is driving us some really aggressive decarbonization targets in our electric portfolio. We've got to be off of coal by the end of this year. That's about 20% of our generating portfolio, carbon neutral by 2030. And then off of fossil fuel entirely for the generation space by 2045. In round numbers, that basically means we've got to triple the energy output of the company in about the next 20 years. So it's taken us about over 100 years to get to this size, and then to triple it in the next 20 years is a steep, really steep ask. What we're seeing is how do we navigate sort of the intersection and some of the conflicts between our mandates, which are a low-cost portfolio, and how we leverage and take advantage of some of the most rapid and vibrant investments in clean energy technology that the country has seen in maybe a generation. So, we're finding that how do we lean into that? How do we take advantage of that? It doesn't necessarily fit with both the legislative and the regulatory model that we've been operating under for a very long time. So, how do we scale? How do we adopt? How do we engage? These are new questions, and our regulators are central to a lot of this.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, everyone, for your opening remarks. I enjoyed hearing more about your experiences, your perspectives. Now let's jump into kind of the core of today's conversation. So we'll walk through three primary themes that reflect both the challenges and opportunities outlined in AI's policy brief. We'll start off talking about the technologies and your all's perspective on those technologies. Then we'll get into the regulations, and then finally collaboration. So for each, I'll invite each of you to respond with about 2 minutes of remarks, but feel free to keep it conversational and reference each other's comments if you'd like. But we're going to start off with unlocking breakthrough technology. So a couple of guiding questions for this particular topic are, what are some recent or upcoming technology advancements that you're working on or most excited about to meet some of these challenges or some of these requirements that have come down the pike? What stands in the way of deployment, and what could be done to help? When you answer these questions, just keep in mind that we're going to be diving into the regulatory innovation and barriers and collaboration next. So try to not go into those areas a little bit too much. But with that said, let's start off with Michael, unlocking breakthrough technologies.
You know, the word technology gets thrown around a lot, and I think a lot of people interpret it in different ways. The opening thought that comes to mind, Chris, here is that a lot of times we talk about supply side technologies, the widget that makes things. But I think it's really important in this particular moment to recognize that there are demand side technologies that are really changing the landscape and changing the boundaries of the challenges that we have to meet. In particular, artificial intelligence, the rise of data centers as a major driver for energy demand, happening at the same time that we are reaching very close to the limits of the existing energy infrastructure that we have. It's always difficult, and maybe even more so today than ever, to build new transmission, new pipelines, new energy infrastructure. To do that quickly has always been a challenge. But as our energy demand has gone from being 1, maybe 2% a year of growth for the last couple of decades to suddenly jumping an order of magnitude, maybe even more above that, because data centers and artificial intelligence are driving that, as well as the electrification of transportation and of buildings and of industry. The rules have changed. And when the rules change, you can't play the same game. The game that we've always played has been at a fairly steady pace. Suddenly we're going to go from jogging to sprinting, and it's not even clear which direction we need to sprint. So the first thought there is that technology on the demand side is really rewriting the rules for what we need to accomplish and how quickly we need to deliver on it.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that perspective on the demand side and bringing that into the conversation, because it really, in addition to the requirements that we've set on ourselves in various states or at various levels of government, there's a naturally market driving demand that's also creating a lot of urgency for us. Chris, would you mind adding some remarks on how to unlock breakthrough technologies?
Sure. We're looking at everything and anything that can get us to a decarbonized gas grid. So we're looking at renewable natural gas, different ways of getting it. So synthetic methane to decrease costs and increase supplies. We're looking at hydrogen production. So turquoise hydrogen, blue hydrogen, things like that. But I guess we're paying particular attention to carbon capture and sequestration. As we look at the risk and cost associated with that, the cost side looks really, really good for our customers and the ability to scale. The problems that we're looking at is just where do you put the CO2? And we have some opportunities here in Northwest Oregon with some really favorable geology to put in basically hundreds of years of CO2, which could really change everything, the economics for everything that we do. It's kind of the barriers that we're experiencing and kind of unlocking that is as we as a utility don't have a risk profile that's supported to go poking holes in the ground and seeing where we could put this stuff. It's really not something that we as a utility have been traditionally incentivized to do. And so we're kind of relying on others to go develop these resources, to unlock them for us. And it's really tough to get private industry to get in there. tougher to get the state behind these kinds of very large scale projects. So that's what's kind of buzzing at our shop right now.
Sounds like you guys are looking at a bunch of technologies, kind of assessing where the greatest value to your customers could potentially be, whether it's hydrogen, carbon capture, sequestration, which makes sense. Steve, can you add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. This is, like I said earlier, this is maybe the most exciting time to be in the energy industry, just because of the pace and depth and breadth of innovation and development across all sectors. In the generation space, wind and solar, they've reached maturity at this point. They're running into some real challenges around siting and transmission access. So what are some of those generation technologies are non-carbon emitting, that can be deployed in a reasonable time frame, and that help drive a resource adequacy solution, not just an energy solution? So think small modular nuclear reactors, enhanced geothermal, over the horizon fusion is getting a lot of interest, and for very good reason. As a holy grail, is a potentially very sophisticated way of doing distributed energy. Very hopeful that industry can grow and scale. Of those three, enhanced geothermal is one of the most interesting, mostly because it is relatively low risk. It is really about integrating two existing technologies today in hydraulic fracturing and drilling out of the oil and gas base, and then a closed loop steam turbine. Those are things that we've done for a very long time. And there's considerable heat up and down the western United States where we serve. So, looking at that and really supporting development, broadcasting on what our needs are to those developers, on saying, here's the problem that we have, help meet us in the middle. The natural gas system, poses a unique set of problems as well. But how we've looked at that for the longest time is, as a liability in terms of carbon emissions. And by working with groups like Modern Hydrogen, we're flipping that equation on its head, saying, can a technology solution turn a liability into an asset? Solid carbon is in everywhere. It's in everything that we use. Can we make that a net positive for our customers? Look at the strengths of the gas system. It is incredibly resilient. It's incredibly durable. It can provide be one of the clean energy solutions of the future. Part of the challenge and what we face in really dealing with a public-facing environment is that it's a transition, but oftentimes that gets translated into a switch. This is going to be slow. It's going to be incremental. It's going to be adoption of new solutions in many different sectors. This isn't just like we get to 2045 and then switch our portfolio. It's going to be, again, incremental in lots of different phases.
Appreciate that, Steve. And I like the concept of just maximizing the return on our assets and our investments and our existing pipeline systems, and making sure we leverage not just the financial investment, but the environmental impact associated with the previous construction of those pipelines. Just maximizing it as a whole is extremely valuable. And Kiera, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well, and your thoughts on just technology that you're excited about in your space and what you've seen out there.
Sure. So I like the way that Michael approached this question with talking about both supply and demand side innovations. I think there's really exciting developments happening across the utility sector. On the supply side, there's been a lot of interest in regulators and utilities in advanced nuclear, and that's an area where we have some funding from the U.S. Department of Energy to do educational events and training resources for state utility regulators, so trying to help them understand what are small modular reactors, what are micro reactors, what services can they provide, what are the costs, and how can those be appropriately allocated among utility customers, industrial customers, and other users of advanced nuclear generation. Another exciting area that we've been monitoring for several years is the use of artificial intelligence in the utility sector, both by state regulators and by utilities. Some of the ways that it's being used currently are trying to speed up interconnection queues. There have been applications to identify 811 excavation tickets that are more likely to result in damage to natural gas pipelines or other underground infrastructure. So picking out what those kind of problem tickets are and being able to go out and do proactive damage prevention And then among commissions, there's been some use of AI to just research what other states are doing. So that's always helpful. That's something that we try to provide to NARUC's membership as well. I think on the demand side, there's been a lot of innovation in aligning incentives for distributed energy resources to provide benefits not only to the customer that's owning the DER, but also to the system more broadly. Like in Vermont and Massachusetts have both implemented programs to incentivize energy storage systems that can be controlled on and called upon by utilities during peak demand times and reduce stress across the system. I think it's important for these technology developers and utilities when they're rolling out these technologies to just be aware of the importance of educating customers on the benefits and appropriate operation of some of these technologies. Obviously, the regulator is an important stakeholder here, so communicating to the regulator about the benefits of some of these technologies. And then I think actually kind of the rapid pace of technological advancement sort of works against itself in a way. Regulators might be wary about being locked into a technology that might be obsolete in a couple of years or might come down in price, and they might be stuck at whatever the current price is. So I think that kind of underscores the importance of taking incremental steps, using pilot programs, and just learning from initial deployments of a technology to improve that offering in the future.
Appreciate that perspective. I mean, so often us as or project developers are thinking about, their time, their budget, their schedule, and of course stakeholder engagement. But putting that regulator hat on and looking at it from that perspective can really kind of smooth project development and technology innovation and implementation. So thank you all for your comments on unlocking the breakthrough technologies. I'll move on to just regulatory innovation and barriers. So similar to the past topic, here's some guiding questions. Where have you seen regulations support technology and innovation? Where have regulations slowed technology, innovation, and implementation down? And how could that evolve to be more supportive, or does it need to be more supportive? So I'll start with Stephen this time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a fascinating topic to wade into because it does influence and guide so many of our decisions. I think one of the challenges is just the mismatch between how you get a utility closer to the initial set of deployments on some emerging technology. Right now, almost everything in our world is geared towards commercially available, proven technologies, but that's inherently not what emerging technology is. And so I think the question that we face as customers, as businesses, as regulators is, how do we manage and mitigate the risk? Someone has to figure out and meet really in the middle in this process and think like, what are the business mechanisms? What are the regulatory compacts that we can collectively agree are safe, prudent, and managed in such a way that reduce risk for everyone, while giving developers the certainty that they need to be able to really go get the investment to deploy. Ultimately, utilities just by their nature are probably the ultimate buyers of this stuff. But if we're going to sit on the sidelines and be excluded from moving on those very first of a kind units, how do those emerging technology developers even get off the ground? That's the conundrum that we face, is how do you buy down the risk? So from an enablement mechanism, one example that is pretty interesting is what's going on in Nevada with Google, Fervo, and NV Energy. Google is disproportionately paying a higher rate to Fervo, and NV Energy is serving as the deliverer and balancing authority. I think that is really a great innovative step on how regulatory design and a clean transition tariff can be one solution towards bringing emerging technology to scale. It may not be the only one, but certainly like a lot of the characteristics that have been approved down in that state.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate those comments. Kiera, can you add to that?
Sure. So I think, again, kind of building on my answers to the first set of questions, demand response, virtual power plants, just kind of the ability to use distributed energy resources to provide broader system stability and reliability. I think there's been a lot of interest among state regulators there, particularly as we've seen more extreme weather events and outages happening across the country. In Vermont, the utility there has a commission-approved program for residential storage incentives, again, where the utility can control those during peak times and participate in the ISO New England market. That program was launched in 2020, and due to high customer demand and wait lists to participate, they expanded it a couple of years ago. So I think that's a great example of successful regulation supporting technology innovation. I think another area on the natural gas side is residential methane detectors. This is something that NARUC members have been interested in for a couple of years now. The New York Public Service Commission approved a pilot program with Con Ed to install residential natural gas detectors where they can detect a natural gas leak before a human could actually smell it. They can automatically notify the utility and notify emergency services that there is a gas leak. And then ideally there can be a response before damage is incurred. So there was an initial pilot rollout of that technology in I think in Brooklyn within Con Ed service territory, and then it was later expanded after some positive feedback from that pilot program. So I think where things have kind of slowed down or where regulation has sort of stood in the way of innovation, I think is more around understanding the incentives that utilities face when deploying emerging technologies. So one example is kind of AI and cloud software is generally treated as an operational expense. And so utilities might be slower to invest versus capital expenditures where they can earn a rate of return. And that might need. So we've seen some commissions kind of taking a look at that and figuring out, how can they modify their regulations and incentives for their regulated utilities so that they're investing in solutions that are beneficial to customers, technologically proven, commercially available, et cetera. So I think there's also, kind of a second mover, first mover problem with the regulated utility sector. Going back to advanced nuclear, we see a lot of utilities kind of positioning themselves as second movers. They want to see that something is proven before they go and invest ratepayer money in it, which, is definitely a sentiment shared among public utility regulators, but it does require someone to be a first mover. So I think sort of coming up with maybe coalitions that can help to scale emerging technologies and spread risk across multiple jurisdictions so that no one group of customers is really at risk can be a good way to navigate those issues.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, both you and Steve are really, honing in on the risk and the uncertainty in order to get these technologies off the ground. So it's very interesting to hear that common theme. And I love hearing the various application of innovative technologies, not just from a decarbonization perspective, but from a safety perspective and a reliability perspective and a utilization. So I really appreciate the breadth of this conversation. Michael, can you add to the conversation around regulatory innovation and barriers?
A couple of great points have been raised. Chris, you'll appreciate this. In Portland, Oregon, where both Chris and I live, there's a thing called the Portland traffic jam, which is cars arriving at an intersection and just basically gesturing to each other. No, you go first. No, you go first. And traffic comes to a halt. I've seen that happen time and time again when it comes to new technology space, where each jurisdiction wants someone else to go first. The saying in the West sometimes is you can tell the pioneers are the ones with the arrows in their backs. So there is a disincentive, an active and significant one, to being a first mover. And we desperately need to figure out ways to, we talked about risk, but there's also reward. They're tied together, and they're the flip sides of the same coin. If we can share in risk, that means we can also all benefit in the reward. And the rewards are substantial. Finding ways to have abundant and affordable energy without wrecking the environment that we all share is a pretty big upside. I just want to flag that the innovations two innovations that I would like to see. One is that having each state not require a technology to be proven in its own boundaries, recognizing it as legitimate and proven, would be a great step forward. I've seen it so many times where one state says, "Well, I know what happened over there, but that we can't consider that in our docket because it didn't happen here, because the laws of physics are different in my state than in another state somehow." And Kiera, your point about maybe there's coalitions or consortiums, both from a technology point of view, maybe from a utility perspective, but also between regulatory jurisdictions, where we can say that if it happened in this group, then we're all going to recognize it as being legitimate and real. The second that I would offer up is better coordination between the gas side of what we do and the electric side of what we do. At the end of the day, they're both energy services. And I think, a customer who wants heat or needs heat to get through cold winter, it doesn't really matter to that end use customer if it comes from an electron or if it comes from a molecule. It's the energy service that is the benefit of heat. And the way we treat that today in the regulatory world and utility world, there's just these kind of walls too often between the gas side of things and the electric side of things. We talk about integrated resource planning. On my Christmas wish list is a truly integrated resource planning paradigm where we can say, what's better, the electron here or the molecule here, the pipeline here or the wire there? Can we make these way more fungible so that we can truly get to a least cost, least risk, highest reward kind of scenario when it comes to energy services, as opposed to just the electron or the molecule that we all too often treat separately today.
Very good points, Michael. When it comes to just assessing technologies, would you recommend maybe all states adopting the technology readiness levels that the federal government has, the TRLs, or do you see a different model for doing that?
That's an interesting question, Chris. TRLs have been a great step forward. I think they first came about from NASA back in the day. I think they're also an imperfect tool because it doesn't really reflect commercialization readiness yet. It's purely a technology paradigm, and so it doesn't factor in bankability or regulatory treatment or policy favorability. And so I think it's a great starting point. I think there's also room for improvement in how we would use that as a tool. What I would also like to float is, utilities have things like EPRI where they work together and collaborate. I don't know of regulatory analogs to that where they different states, there's different kind of regional state collaborations, but I don't know from like a technology first of a kind deployment perspective if there are analogs between what EPRI does in terms of technology testing and piloting. I fear I've seen it happen that we can pilot ourselves to death and we can pilot technologies to death. New technology only has so much runway, and pilots are occupy very valuable real estate on that runway. So I would love to see some sort of consortium come together in the regulatory world where you can pilot once and then get takeoff across a bunch of different places at the same time.
Makes sense. And let's dive into that a little bit more in the next topic around partnerships and progress. But before we do, Chris, I would love to hear your perspective on regulatory innovation and barriers.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has been said, and I echo a lot of what Steve was mentioning. And one thing that we see on the risk is just what hasn't been identified from our regulators is the risk of not doing something. So here in Oregon, we have some extremely aggressive decarbonization regulations. We have to decarbonize 50% by 2035 and 90% by 2050. That's an enormous amount of decarbonization. And so if we don't have all of the resources available to us, to decarbonize, we could be decarbonizing at a much higher expense than we need to. So if the only thing available to us is, say, renewable natural gas, and we need to decarbonize at, let's say, 3 billion cubic feet of gas per year, every year for the next 27 years, that's going to be a cost here. But if we could go after, let's say, carbon capture or turquoise hydrogen or methane pyrolysis at half the cost, but we can't access that because we weren't able to spend money on pilots or getting assurancy of rate recovery on deploying it, it's going to be a huge hit to our customers. And so there really isn't an acknowledgement that utilities really need to be ahead in this space to develop these technologies that really no one else has a huge interest in developing at the scales we do. And we need to take some risk and be able to do that and look forward to getting recovery or expecting recovery on taking risks. It's not, the business as usual in the past where we just made slow incremental changes. These are massively transformational changes that we have to make as utilities. And if we don't take risks, we are going to be spending a lot more money than we need to.
Very, very important topic. The risk of doing nothing or the risk of not doing or adopting certain technologies or innovations is very powerful. I'm going to start the next topic off with Kiera, and this topic is fostering partnerships and progress. So a couple guiding questions are, how do we better align stakeholders to help match technology breakthroughs with regulatory innovation? What makes partnerships across sectors actually work? And I would love if you could integrate kind of a response to what Michael was saying earlier into your remarks to kick us off on this topic.
Yeah, certainly. So in response to Michael's question about sort of who is the EPRI for state regulators, I mean, NARUC does try to do that. We don't have quite the budget and the size of organizations like EPRI, and on the gas side, GTI Energy. We actually just took a group of about 40 state energy offices and public utility commissioners down to Charlotte to tour EPRI's offices and learn about some of their work on the nuclear fleet, which is very impressive. But anyway, we only have a staff of about 25, but we do try to do that kind of socialization and learning across commissions. So one of the activities that I really enjoy putting together are peer sharing calls where we invite some regulators or regulatory staffers to share how they're approaching a certain issue and identify challenges that they're running into, seek advice from regulators in other states, and document lessons learned so that each state understands that, the states are great laboratories of innovation, but we obviously can learn from approaches, and we don't have to start from scratch with every new technology or new issue. So I think the national labs have also been a really important partner to NARUC in some of the states. Several of the labs have funding opportunities to do technical assistance for state commissions and kind of do that sort of hard technical consulting that NARUC as an organization can't really provide, but part of our role, and I think part of our benefit to our members, is being able to connect them with experts in the federal government and with available programs that state regulators can take advantage of to help accomplish their goals. In terms of kind of aligning stakeholders, I think just understanding the priorities of a commission. In general, commissions are concerned with safety, affordability, and reliability of utility services. Increasingly, many commissions are looking at climate goals and, kind of how to implement the clean energy goals that policymakers come up with. Several commissions also look at economic development and sort of job creation and the use of in-state resources within their state. So I'd say to utilities and technology developers just to look at what motivates commissions and what can they actually consider in their decision making, what can go on the record to help them decide whether or not to adopt a new technology. I think also looking at how to appropriately share the costs and benefits of technologies, making sure that those are aligned. That's something that we see a lot with microgrids, which I haven't really gotten the chance to talk to yet, but I think that there's a lot of exciting work happening there. And the Department of Energy just released some funding for to support community microgrids across the country. So I think with the role of commissions and kind of overseeing microgrids that have a utility-owned component is really looking at how to pay for those and how to come up with rate-making tools that can spread the cost of those microgrids among the customers who can actually benefit from it in the case of an outage. So I'd say those two. I think with AII's policy brief, I know talked about multi-benefit approaches, but really understanding what benefits a project is delivering to utility customers, I think is going to be the main question of interest for state utility regulators.
Thank you, Kiera. I appreciate those comments. Steve, do you want to add to that? What do you think is fostering good partnerships and progress in this space, both from a technology and regulatory innovation perspective?
Sure. There's been some pockets of continuous innovation within the utility industry, but they're really isolated around one specific end use. Think energy efficiency. That's been around for quite a while now, and demand side response, weatherization. Those are programs that involve some level of technology. It's premature at this point, but how those were scaled and implemented probably 20, 30 years ago, I think informs what we're doing today. We're seeing those lessons really embedded in the customer energy innovation side with solar and battery beyond the meter, virtual power plants, and then grid modernization would be another one where certainly you could put microgrids in that category. What's shown up recently is really a gap in that customers don't really understand, number one, their own energy needs. They take for granted that you turn on the switch and the light comes on, or you turn the knob and your burner comes on. But upstream of that, they may have a little more influence in thinking about how do they want to be served? What are their clean aspirational goals? And they don't know what their options are. And because of the pace of innovation, the pace of technology, and then the business model itself is pretty opaque unless you live it every day. So incorporating customer expectations, what are their wishes, really working with them in a collaborative way, thinking about energy in terms of orchestration, not just serving load, that I think is the missing component. I think that will help regulators as well understand what is motivating the utility. Hey, we're hearing this from our customers. It's not necessarily yesterday's way of serving energy. It's actually something different. How are we figuring this out together so that the regulatory model can evolve as customer choice evolves as well? Because really, at the end of the day, that's what we exist to do. We serve load, we serve our customers. And if their expectations and their behaviors are changing, how are we changing with them, especially from a regulatory framework?
Yeah, it definitely seems like with the high rate of change, there needs to be more conversations and dialogue to make sure we understand what's motivating people, what their needs are, where the technology is. It seems like more frequent, regular communication could only be a benefit. Chris, do you want to add to the remarks so far?
Yeah, so just aligning stakeholders with technology breakthroughs and regulatory innovation. I think a great example of this is in Minnesota. They have a natural gas innovation fund, and what this has done is basically it's created a mechanism where stakeholders from all different walks of life can come together and figure out what kind of innovation the utility should be working on, what makes sense, and then it gives the whole ecosystem assurance of rate recovery and all moving in one direction. And I think that was a really innovative way of doing things there, and it reduces a lot of different barriers. Another thing I comment on is just the role of our regulators at the commission level in bringing all the parties to the table for figuring out decarbonization and energy management. And just echoing what Michael said before, we really need regional energy planning and recognizing the values of different parts of the energy system, the capacity that the natural gas system provides versus the benefits that the electric system provides, and getting the two parties together or different utilities together and giving them mutual incentives to decrease overall costs for everyone. Right now, we're very, very siloed in our utility landscape. We don't really think about the electric utilities tariffs or rates, and they don't think about ours. But we think, I think anyways, the regulators should force the situation for us to come together and really maximize the benefits of each other's systems and come up with innovative rate making and policies in that space. That'd be something that's truly new for the Pacific Northwest.
Michael, do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Steve, I think you mentioned energy efficiency as a paradigm that has, delivered a great deal. I think it is one of the more meaningful sort of innovations, regulatory innovations, at least in my generation, in my time, in my career. And I think a lot about how can we learn from what we've been able to accomplish through energy efficiency, especially because at this moment, energy efficiency may no longer be 100% aligned with decarbonization. This is a time where we might need to encourage use of more electricity as we go into electric vehicle as a transportation resource. Just a quick example, like inclining block rates for electricity discourage people from using more electricity, even if it means it's offset by less gasoline and less carbon ultimately. Energy efficiency in the form of decoupled rates. It reduces the volumetric charge, and it gives you a signal to use less gas. But if we're going to be doing methane pyrolysis, as our company does, to decarbonize natural gas, then they're no longer one for one. Using less gas doesn't mean less carbon. We could actually use more gas and still have zero carbon. And so the alignment, is not perfect, but I do think that there are things that we can learn from what we've been able to accomplish with the energy efficiency programs and paradigms and systems that we've developed, which have been an incredible resource for reaching alignment between stakeholders, mobilizing capital for investment, and setting up programs that have done a whole lot of good.
Thank you, Michael. I think it's interesting to think about the trade-offs and to challenge our current or past paradigms on how we think about energy efficiency or other metrics that we measured success, whether it's producing hydrogen from natural gas or sequestering CO2 in the subsurface. It takes energy, and I think that's a very powerful and meaningful point that we need to make, is we have to kind of step back and look at the problems that we're trying to solve more holistically and realize there's a little bit more complexity in assessing the trade-offs between those various aspects. All right, so diving into, we covered our 3 topics. Really appreciate the conversation we had thus far and the remarks provided. So if there's something that you heard that sparked or raised a question, I just want to give you all as panelists an opportunity to ask each other questions without me monopolizing the floor. So I'm going to open it up to the panelists to ask each other's questions. If there's anything you're curious about, you'd like to follow up on, you have clarifications you want to hear, or just healthy challenges, now's the time to do that. So who would like to start or has any questions that they'd like to ask another panelist?
Kiera, I've got one for you if you don't mind. Performance-based rate making. We've had some experiments that are underway. Do you think that plays a role? Does it hold promise in terms of addressing, the climate and carbon and energy reliability and security challenges that I think we're all trying to solve for?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a performance-based regulation state working group where we've been, again, sharing lessons learned across states and looking at different state approaches. There's been a lot of interest in that. The DOE Office of Electricity has been funding that work. So I think there's going to be continuing interest in performance-based regulation and again, aligning incentives for customers and utilities for broader system benefits. I think one of the challenges with performance-based regulation is coming up with appropriate metrics. Like for reliability, we have SAIDI, KD metrics, but we've seen increasingly those don't full story about reliability performance. They don't really look at impacts on customers when there is a power outage. And so there's some work that some of the utilities have done to try to get or to try to develop better metrics for reliability and resilience. And we've seen some commissions looking at those. So I think that's kind of coming up with the right metric that can actually be quantified and where you can track performance year over year, I think is really one of the key challenges with performance-based regulation. But yeah, absolutely. I think it does have an important role to play in this space.
Thank you both. Oh, sir. Kiera, did you have a question?
Well, I wanted to kind of pick up, I think Chris mentioned gas electric coordination in one of his answers, and I kind of wanted to pick up on that and see if the other panelists had thoughts on that topic. It's certainly something that's come up for regulators. We have a gas electric alignment for reliability task force led by our current NARUC president, Tricia Pridemore from Georgia. There was a North American Energy Standards Board gas electric harmonization forum a couple of years ago that some former FERC commissioners led, that many state regulators and utilities and some of the major trade organizations participated in, that I think led to some really fruitful conversations. But I'm curious if that's a topic that that others have encountered at their organizations, and kind of what role you think technological innovation plays in gas electric coordination.
Yeah, I can take this one because we are in the middle of this. As a result of a bill that passed, it was a couple years ago now, House Bill 1589, that came out of the Washington State Legislature, that shifted the foundations of how the utility plans energy. Up until that bill, we did have two separate planning activities under the Integrated Resource Plan framework. There was a gas portfolio and an electric portfolio. We are transitioning to an integrated system plan, the ISP. So that is in development right now. First draft ISP, I believe, is due in 2027. So that is incorporating, non-pipes and non-wires alternatives, other alternative technology solutions. The challenge around technology is there still is the element of risk, both technological and financial, in adoption in an ISP framework. We'd like to be able to incorporate it, but there's still an element of timing on when is it commercially available, how reliable is it going to be. It's difficult to make a plan that you're not 100% certain you can deliver on. But from an energy planning framework, credit to our state for leaning into this, and very excited to see where this is going. But at a regional level, I think Chris is right. We sort of talk about it, but really, this is just integrated system planning at the utility level. It's not regional coordination between the transport customers, the federal Bonneville system, and the individual utilities. We still have a lot of ground to do there. So ideally, what we're doing may inform some of those next iterations of utility design. I would say that there is also an interesting disconnect in maybe it's probably hyper local, but it's how the regulatory environment looks at regulated utilities versus publicly owned utilities and coordinating those load forecasts. They're different models. State regulators do not have oversight and purview over the state utilities, the public utilities, but they're pretty big as well. They're a very big player, especially with having a federal hydro system underpinning so much of our electric infrastructure up here. So continuing to grow on that and build on that, I think, is sort of the next step on what we're looking for.
Steve, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
And if you don't know, that's fine too. Does the integrated system planning, every conversation I've heard about gas electric coordination and planning focuses really, or is born out of, a reliability and energy availability kind of concern. Does the integrated system plan that you guys are starting to put together, does that also include not just a cost and reliability angle, but also a carbon optimization perspective?
To a degree. Ultimately, if you're building a plan around carbon optimization, you need to be able to price it. And that's what the Climate Commitment Act in Washington does. It just put a price on carbon. So when deploying electric asset, we do, from a generation stack, we do include that CCA cost as well as the sulfur cost of greenhouse gas. So I think that informs the generation side. And in some cases, that may drive you towards, hey, a pipe solution may be a little bit better. So if that's something that would be more of an interest, we could probably connect offline on, or I could bring in those experts to talk about that as well. Sounds like another conversation, Chris.
Well, we're kind of getting to the end. Is there any last or closing remarks that our panelists would like to end with?
I'm going to throw a Hail Mary, which is, I know it's already a challenge or something that we need to do to coordinate gas and electric better, but I also do believe that our energy system does not exist in a bubble. And what we do at Modern Hydrogen, we're producing clean hydrogen by removing carbon from methane. That carbon also has value as it can help build infrastructure. And so, my holy grail sort of wish list would be finding ways that we can have conversations across sectors, across industries that allow us to make the most of energy resources, not just for energy, but also in other parts of our economy. Jobs are jobs, infrastructure is infrastructure, and if we can use our energy resources in ways that help us on all fronts, not just on the energy front, then I think we'll be well served as a country.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Michael. And that AII, or the Alliance for Innovation Infrastructure, completely agrees with you. That's why the organization takes a holistic systems approach to how we think about and look at infrastructure. And so the fact that we're driving towards more holistic planning across all energy sources and in terms of decarbonization, and that's where this conversation has gone is very, very fitting. Anybody else have any closing remarks before? No?
Yeah, just on Michael's point on the importance of planning, that's absolutely something that we're looking at NARUC. We have a task force of about 20 state commissions looking at planning processes for natural gas utilities, recognizing that in most states, the requirements are less kind of drawn out than for electric utilities. So just giving the commission more visibility, and so the way that utilities make decisions, I think is very important. And I just put in a plug. I know this is not, I know Steve and Chris probably know their commissions very well, but just to get to know your state utility regulators and what motivates them, I think is important for a lot of stakeholders.
And Kiera, this is an opportunity. I think I saw on LinkedIn there's some kind of job fair that NARUC is doing. Do you want to put a plug in for that? Yeah,
absolutely. We are holding a virtual job fair to try to connect talent to commissions at across all fields and all stages of careers. So that is coming up on June 18th. You can go to our website or our Twitter or LinkedIn to find more info on that. But yep, anyone is welcome. Anyone interested in getting more talent into public utility commissions.
I think a large part of it is getting people, the right people, and creating a pipeline for the workforce. And so I love that you all are doing that, and happy to give you the opportunity to do a little plug there for it. But I just want to thank the panelists. You guys are absolutely wonderful, not just in speaking here today, but your leadership and what you're doing for your customers, for the environment is greatly appreciated. The Alliance for Innovation Infrastructure truly appreciates your participation in this panel, and we hope to have similar panels in the future. But once again, thank you all for coming to this panel discussion on matching technology breakthroughs with regulatory innovation. And with that, we will close the panel. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all have a wonderful day.